Welcome to Liminal Radio. I'm Gray.
And I'm Hatter, and today we have something very special, something we want to do going forward at least once a week. We're going to tell you some true horror stories, well, oftentimes allegedly true. Today's is legitimately a true story, a genuine freak of nature.
We are talking about the story of the Frenchman known as Tarrare. There's some debate on exactly how you would pronounce it. My French isn't great, so please don't hold me to it. If you happen to be French or speak French, feel free to correct us in the comments, but I'm going to be saying Tarrare for the rest of this episode, who was sort of like a medical mystery. He was a showman. He was someone who had a lot of like horrible tragedy and terrible things that happened to him.
Tarrare. You know what? I'm going to stop doing this before the entire French side of the audience decides to abandon us. But yes, he had some very strange, do we want to call them mutations? I'm going to call them mutations. Did you ever meet somebody, Gray, who would say that they're so hungry they could eat an entire horse?
I have, and it just so happens that Tarrare wasn't joking when he said he could.
Now, we don't have any kind of history of him actually eating a horse, but we have a history of him eating a lot of other things. Now, let's talk a bit about this guy.
Now, let's start with him physically. Apparently, he was normally a very thin person, almost emaciated often, because he actually had massive caloric requirements that could never really be filled. He was basically always hungry. He had an insatiable hunger. And as we go on to describe more and more about him, I think you will kind of understand where the horror of this comes from. As we describe him, he's going to sound like someone who might be from a Clive Barker novel, or maybe even an Aaron Beauregard novel.
Oh yeah, for sure. And yeah, the guy had a long history of essentially just trying to survive because of the massive amount of food he'd need. Like, he would make money, like people would pay to see him eat, let's say, a dozen or 2 dozen apples, and he'd be swallowing them whole, everything. The guy's mouth was very large, first of all. He had a very large mouth, and his stomach, typically, as Gray said, he looked kind of emaciated and thin, but his stomach could expand by many degrees as he just filled it up with massive amounts of whatever he could find.
Now, kind of talking a little bit about like his life and how this all came about and affected his life. He was born in rural France, of course, and one of the things that he would do, as you said, is he would kind of, in order to make money, he would have people pay to watch him eat all sorts of things. This eventually turned into him becoming a carnival geek. Now, carnival geek is a very specific term. A geek is someone who performs in a carnival by eating things that are terrifying, horrifying, or just normally not eaten. Sometimes they eat entire light bulbs or broken glass or live animals. And he did all of that. He would eat, as you had said, whole apples, eels, live animals. He would eat tremendous amount of meats. He was said to be able to eat a quarter of a cow in one sitting. And he would eat until his belly was visibly distended.
And stick around till the end to find out the most horrifying thing he might have eaten. You'll just have to wait. But yeah, ultimately the guy was just insatiable. He could not get full, and his body was strange in other ways too, related to the eating. A few people had documented that if you looked down his mouth after he ate, you could see straight into his stomach.
Absolutely. And also he was purported to always just this vile smell about him that probably had something to do with all the unnatural things he was eating and his body attempting to digest them. So that was probably related.
Yeah, and I also read a few times that after he ate like we want to say a big meal, but for him it's just, lunch, that as he digested, he would digest quickly too, and a kind of smoke would come off him. I believe they use the term miasma. There would be like a fog around him as he digested.
Absolutely. Now, in the parlance of the term, miasma could have just, again been another word for a smell. So it's hard to say because, of course, we're operating off very old accounts of this. Now, one thing that I find very interesting is that this was, of course, during Napoleonic times, Napoleonic France. So he joined the military, probably hoping that they would help to feed him. He ate, I want to say, 4 to 5 times normal rations. And of course, this was a problem because they were having trouble feeding their own soldiers, much less having to feed a guy 4 or 5 times. But they came up with an idea where they thought he could be useful because they could tell that he could swallow things. So the idea was for him to be a spy, swallow some documents, and then pass them later once he was across checkpoints. So they tried this. It did not go well. It failed horribly. I don't know how they caught him. I don't know why they caught him, but they did catch him. They beat him. They put him through a quote unquote mock execution, which, from what I understand, was basically they had him stand with the rope as though they were going to hang him and decided not to hang him. And basically, after thoroughly beating him, sending him back to his masters. So they decided that he was not actually a good spy and he was kicked out of the military.
And yeah, I can't say that I would be able to complain where I kicked out of the military because I was useless, because that would be the ideal outcome of being in the military. Well, the ideal outcome would never be never being there in the beginning to begin with. I can't talk today. But yeah, can you imagine having we talk about zombie survival all the time. Can you imagine having one person, if you got a small team and a small compound, who eats 5 times what everybody else does?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that would be almost impossible to handle, because even if he is producing at max effectiveness, contributing, he's still consuming 5 times what everyone else is. So that's such a huge liability. And of course, obviously there were not zombies in France, but they were fighting Englishmen, which is similar. And the thing of, they were struggling to feed him. So they were dealing with a very similar kind of equations of, hey, we have to get X amount of work from people for X amount of food. And he was really messing up that equation.
Yeah, and if you can imagine just how that equation goes, I guess in the military it would be how much ground you can take. You have a certain amount of ground you need to take with each soldier, and it's kind of like fuel economy. And I hate to put people in the light like they're cars, because they're not. People are not things. But yeah, just mathematically, Tarrare was not a good fit for the military.
Now, after he kicked out of the military, he actually went to a sanitarium, a hospital, for the time, and which of course have a lot of questionable practices. So they started trying to figure him out, trying to do experiments with him. So they had him eat all kinds of things: cork, stones, apparently more live animals. I don't know why everyone was obsessed with him eating live animals, but they did. I mean, it was that era. They were weird.
Yeah, and going back to the thing we said about the carnies, the geeks. Have you ever seen American Horror Story Freak Show?
Yes.
You remember Meet the Geek, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the common idea of the geek tends to be somebody biting the heads off chickens, which, okay, come on, gross. I don't know, and I agree with you. What was it with people back then and people eating, there was a carnival wherein they shocked an elephant to death, and people just gathered around to watch. And that was attributed to Thomas Edison. He has shocked animals. He's a real douchebag, Thomas Edison, but that's for another video. But he wasn't actually involved with that. But yeah, no, they shocked a live elephant in front of a bunch of people. Why did people enjoy that?
See, I actually have some theories about that. Is that this was sort of because of course this was all mostly during like the Victorian era and stuff like that. And of course then the early modern era and that sort of thing. And I think it's because people had gotten to this industrial stage of life. People were living in these cities for the first time, and these not cities for the first time, but in cities in the numbers and sizes unprecedented before. And basically they were bored, and they basically, I hate to say, hadn't invented human decency yet, but they hadn't reinvented it yet with the new urban setting. So basically you had a bunch of bored people hanging around in cities, probably too densely packed, too industrialized, separated from their families and their previous ways of life. So they were bored and dangerous, in my opinion. I think that's where we ended up with a lot of that stuff.
I'm just going to say, thank God for video games, because I think that tempers a lot of that these days.
Oh, absolutely. You can say what you want about the internet and electronic entertainment and music and movies and video games, but it's the good old bread and circuses argument that if you don't give people their bread, their food, and their entertainment, they're going to find their own food and make their own entertainment, and you may not like how they do it. So yeah, video games, movies, music, all that, sports, football, all that kind of stuff is all a big part of keeping people from being dangerous animals, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think for the most part I agree. And you know what? That points us back to Tarrare, who, again, was a circus performer eating live animals. And yeah, back to his sanitarium story, though, circling back around because I got a little off track there.
Just one of the funny stories is that in order to prove that what he could do, he offered to eat the pocket watch of one of the doctors, and the doctor, not thinking that was very funny, told Tarrare that if he did eat his pocket watch, he would absolutely cut it out of him to get it back, which is not a very professional thing for a doctor to say, but is a pretty funny story.
Yeah, and I wonder, they said they could see right down his throat into his stomach. If he did swallow the pocket watch, couldn't they get it out in a less invasive way?
Possibly, although I think generally he would probably pass it in his stool, as would be a polite way to say it. Although I think the doctor was just really trying to threaten him to not eat his damn pocket watch.
And here's another interesting biological question. Was Tarrare capable of throwing up?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know. I do know that there are a lot of conditions that prevent you from being able to. I know there's a lot of animals that can't. So I don't know if he would have been able to or not. Although you would actually think if you could see down his throat, you would actually think it would be harder for him not to throw up. You actually would think he would have problems with a lot of regurgitation. Now, of course, while he's at the sanitarium, one of the interesting things is that he was starving. They were not feeding him enough because it was a sanitarium. And purportedly, he snuck into the morgue and was accused of eating dead bodies. And at one point was even accused, because a child went missing, he was accused of actually eating a baby.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the most horrific parts of the story. Not terrific, horrific, let me be clear. Because, just the idea of being in something's stomach. Imagine that. Imagine that for a minute.
Well, absolutely, because again, we know that he swallowed animals whole. So just the thing of being eaten alive. Now, I know that that's some people's fetish. It's called vor. We're not going to go into it, but it's scary in its own right. But for all of us who don't have that fetish, that is a terrifying idea.
How is it that every time I try to make content, there are things that either I didn't know about or had forgotten about that I'm either taught about or reminded of? Things that I just don't want to think about.
I think it's because your partner's with me, Hatter, because I will 100% always be the one who reminds people of the creepy, messed up, usually not quite safe for work side of things. And yeah, I'm the dude who will be sitting around eating at an IHOP and go, hey, there's this new fetish. And everyone goes, no.
Well, it is a horror podcast, so it fits, it works. But whenever I talk about the thing about him eating the toddler or the baby, I think you've seen Austin Powers, of course, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. Fat bastard, get in my belly.
I ate a baby! And yeah, that's what I think of. Only at Tarrare, it's never funny to eat a living human being, but with Tarrare, it's a lot more tragic because I feel like he almost couldn't help it.
Oh, absolutely. He definitely couldn't. Whenever we're talking about him eating all these really weird things, it was just because he felt like he was starving all the time. I don't almost wish, I literally wish he had been born in the modern times. I'm not saying our modern medical system is amazing by any means, because it's not, but we at least could have handled him in a much more reasonable and scientific way. And I feel like he would have been understood a lot better and received a whole lot better medical care than he did at the time. For one, I'm pretty sure the doctors wouldn't have been having him eat bushels of corks and crap like that.
Yeah, this is ultimately where I am, because there are a lot of illnesses out there that make people feel always hungry. But I did some research before we did this podcast. I have not found anything like Tarrare since we decided to talk about this. Have you? Has there been anything in history since then that you could think of?
No, I've never heard of anyone else talking about anything like that. He's very interesting in that he's very unique. There are people who speculated that he might have had hypothyroidism. They said he had polyphagia, which he did, but that's not really a description in and of itself. That he had polyphagia in that he ate things that weren't food. So that's not really a good description. One of the biggest theories is that he had damage to his amygdala, which is, of course, a part of your brain that, among other things, controls things like hunger. But again, he had physical symptoms that didn't make sense because, I guess theoretically, his stomach could have been deformed by eating too much. I have a hard time picturing him not having some kind of physical mutation along with possibly some sort of mental disorder.
Well, yeah, the way you figure it, they mentioned that his skin seemed kind of loose, that he was skinny, that his stomach could distend. I feel like a lot of that most likely came from him just eating whatever, because they also mentioned his mouth is very large and stretched. I feel like, yeah, it's one thing feeding into another, We have, the amygdala and the thyroid and probably a lot of things going on in his brain that make him feel extra hungry. And he just pushed it to the limit. And, the larger your stomach is, the harder it is for you to feel full.
And I feel like he is such an interesting character. And it's the reason, and part of the inspiration for this entire series we're wanting to do is because some of the real horror is so much even more out there and fantastical than some of the fictional stuff. So I could see a character like Tarrare being in like Hannibal Lecter type of situation, someone like him, or a Hannibal Lecter novel like Silence of the Lambs. I could see him being represented there. I could see him be represented like in an Aaron Beauregard book, which of course is like Playground and the Slob, because of course of the bad smells and the eating things that are horrifying and not food. I really could see him put in a lot of these different fictional universes.
On the note of that Aaron Beauregard thing, we are currently, Gray is currently reading Playground, and we're going to have an in-depth talk and review about that over on the Patreon, so make sure y'all are checking that out.
Absolutely. On our Patreon, we're going to be doing what we're calling Splatterpunk Book Club or Splatterpunk Book Review. We haven't decided on the exact naming yet. And so we're currently reading Playground. I'm reading it. Hatter's already read it. We're going to be talking about it, giving our views on it. Splatterpunk is a really, really interesting thing. It's talking about eating horrifying things and children being consumed, and all that sounds interesting to you. I assure you that and way worse is in the sort of books we're going to be reading in Splatterpunk. So if extreme horror is your thing, that's going to be something you want to check out.
Also, we have the uncensored episodes there, but circling back, we're definitely going to be doing more of these. I think we're going to call it Stranger Than Nonfiction or some stupid title like that. I don't know. But we're going to be doing supposedly and actually true horror stories once a week. I think that'll be a lot of fun. So if like Tarrare, you're always hungry for more.
Hatter, I'm not sure I can forgive you for that pun. We're going to have to talk about it.
There's no excuse for me, and that's totally fine. But if you do want more, we're going to have more content over on the Patreon, longer videos, more uncensored stuff, a lot of stuff we can't talk about here, whether you're listening on Spotify or YouTube. This is all, they're constantly censoring us. We hate it. But yeah, if you have any ideas for more not quote unquote nonfiction, it could be something that is probably not true as long as it's purported as news. Let us know what you want us to talk about down in the comments or at our email at liminal.radio.podcast@gmail.com. But until then, folks, I'm Hatter.
And I'm Gray, and thank you for joining us on the Station Between Stations.